Union of the Unknowns, a podcast dedicated to the exploration of modern culture, presents a weekly digest of current events that may have slipped past your radar. This is not your mama's news. Hello, good evening, and welcome to Not Your Mama's News, presented by the Union of the Unknowns. I'm your host tonight, Keel. With me is a woman of high sophistication, Ashley Think, Change, Repeat.
Hello. How's it going, Keel?
It's going pretty well. Hope you're doing well as well. On Not Your Mama's News, we like to feature top-notch information and news from around the globe that showcases the clown world in which we live. Tonight, it's just the two of us, so I'll hand it over to Ashley. She can kick us off.
Alrighty, I am ready. And my story for this evening is the story that I have talked about before, which is Asha Degree. So for those who may not be familiar with this story, or as a refresher, back in the year 2000, in February, a little girl who was 9 years old by the name of Asha Degree went missing from Shelby, North Carolina. And it was a really odd story because the scuttlebutt, or what was said in the following reports, was that Asha ended up walking down a major highway in basically the middle of the night or very early morning. And she was searched for 2 weeks all over. They did aerial searches, they did walking searches, and she was never located. So now it is over 25 years later. Last September, they ended up issuing some warrants for a family located in that area. And the patriarch of the family was Roy Lee Dedmon. He was somebody who had some local businesses. They owned several properties. They seemed that they had been fairly well off for the area for sure. And so whenever these search warrants were executed, they ended up removing a car from that property, and they seized a bunch of other things. Well, just this past week on the 18th, I believe, more information has been released. And what they did was release text messages and a little bit more information about what is going on with this family. So the family had 3 daughters, the Dedmon family. So the parents were Roy and Connie Dedmon, and they had 3 daughters who at that time were 16, 15, and 13. One of, the oldest daughter had a car so there was this old green car that was reported, and some people said they saw Asha pulled into this car when she went missing. And nothing ever happened in this case for, like I said, 24 years. Now, people never lost interest. There's still a billboard up in Shelby. There's still money that was offered to, if someone provided information that could show where she was or anything like that. And so basically this was a pretty big bombshell, because after everybody who had been following this case knew that these search warrants were issued and that they were searching the Dedmon's property, and that they took that very car, which was like maybe a 1970s model car or something, a green distinctive looking car, and they knew that they had been searching the properties. Well, we find out now that they had also interviewed the family right before these search warrants were executed. And now, or immediately following that, all the way through the holidays, there really was not much else information that was released on this story. And people in the Discord that has been keeping up with it, they were wondering, when are we going to hear something? When are we going to hear something? Maybe it'll be February, because that's the 25-year anniversary. Well, it was just after February 14th when she went missing that we did, in fact, get some new information. So what was released was that they had issued search warrants on one of the daughters' phones. which was the daughter that was 15 years old at the time, and the father's phone. And then today I read through the search warrant, and basically there was some text back and forth with the middle daughter and the oldest daughter. And it was one of the lines that stuck out to me was because the police also said that they they told a comment that she said to them, "If my dad did it, he did it, but I didn't have anything to do with it." So then some of these text messages between her and the oldest sibling indicated that they felt fearful about what was coming, that things were not going to be getting better, that they thought that she did it, which I guess the family's attorney let them know that. So they also took the Roy Lee Dedmon, the father, they took his phone. And apparently, because that was not backed up on the cloud, they were not able to access his messages. But they also noted that her name was Lizzie Dedmon at the time. It's now Lizzie Dedmon Foster. But at that time, after the initial search warrants in September were issued, that there was a lot of phone calls going back and forth between her and the family, like her and the dad, her and the sisters, and then these text messages that indicate that she was very, very worried, very concerned about the situation. She was worried that the entire family was mad at her. She had messaged her ex-husband, and she was saying comments like, "It's all my fault." The other thing was that during the early 2000s, apparently she and the other sister, Sarah Dedmon, they were at local parties and things like that, but somebody distinctly remembered her being very, very intoxicated one evening and crying and kind of having a meltdown, saying that she murdered Asha Degree. And then I don't know if he went forward before this time, but he did go forward to them and pass the lie detector test after these search warrants were issued in September. So
Oh,
this guy,
hold on. Who took a lie detector test?
the guy who had hung out with these sisters in the early
Oh,
2000s.
oh.
And there
Okay.
was one night when this sister said, I killed Asha Degree. And the other sister said, shut the F up. And she grabbed her head. And the guy noted that this was unusual because the other sister was known to be nice, calm, friendly. That wasn't really how she normally behaved. And so after this past year in 2024, September 2024, whenever she or whenever the news came out about the search warrants being executed, he then came forward and told them this story, took the lie detector test. And I don't, from just an overall criminal justice perspective, I don't put very much stock in lie detector tests. They're not admissible in the state of North Carolina as evidence. However, maybe it corroborates his story somewhat, and maybe it adds some credence that this conversation actually did happen, and maybe it was part of the evidence that they used in order to be able to gain these search warrants for their phones at this time. So all that to say, I'm going to put a link for the actual search warrant, and mostly it's text messages. Like, it's not a ton of information, but it's essentially indicating a lot of fear and a lot of anxiety on the part of Lizzie Dedmon Foster, who was the oldest sister, about this situation. So essentially feeling like the walls are closing in on them. And people are speculating, what does this mean? Does this mean that she actually killed Asha Degree? Does it mean that she was complicit, that she helped her father cover up something? We don't know at this time, but it definitely seems like they're getting closer and closer to finally making an arrest on this case. And granted, I know, again, from an unbiased outside criminal justice opinion, that we don't want to just assume that someone is guilty just based on X, Y, and Z. But I'm saying that as somebody who grew up with this case looming, it's very memorable to me when this happened, and that people have never forgotten, and they always have wanted them to be able to find Asha, clear the family, be able to give her a proper burial if she was dead, or find her. And so, who knows what actually happened in the situation. The weird thing is, why would this man so he's in his 80s now, so that was 25 years ago. Why would he be out in the middle of the night, and why would he snatch a little girl off the road? Why would a little girl be walking on the middle of the road? And the family connections, there is a possibility, it's a small town, so it's possible that they did know them, that somehow, some way she was groomed, she was coaxed out of the house. We really don't know. But I will also say that this man allowed his teenage daughters to transport mental patients between the care home that he and his wife owned and Broughton. It was like the Broughton Psychiatric Hospital or Mental Hospital or something like that in Morganton. So basically, the highway that this little girl was found on would have been on that same route. And there was also the suspicion that perhaps these girls were out drinking and they hit her, and they were trying to cover their tracks and they had help from the parents. We really don't know whose intention was what and who did what at this time. But it definitely seems like we're getting a lot closer to getting, hopefully, the truth about what happened to this little girl, and that this case can be closed and that the family can actually have some closure. They were planning the little girl, Ash should agree, her parents were planning on moving. They were living in like a duplex at that time. And my understanding is that, so at that time they were planning on moving. They never moved. They stayed in the same place, I think, all these years because they were hoping she would come back home. And so it's just been one of these cases that I'm sure everybody has something similar. Something happened when you were, in your hometown that you're aware of that maybe you never found out the answers to. And that's where I'm at. I just wanted to find out what happened to her, and hopefully we're getting closer. But that's the update for now. Like I said, I'm going to drop the search warrant in our show notes and a news article so you can get a little bit more information. But this was pretty, pretty significant and just came out this week.
Wow, that's a lot. Yeah, I know we've talked about this before, and yeah, I definitely hope that we get this resolved. All of these unsolved mystery things. Do you know? Speaking of that, has this ever been on like an Unsolved Mysteries or a Netflix documentary or anything like that?
I don't think so. To my knowledge, there has not been an unsolved mystery about it. It's possible. I also don't know about a documentary. I think most of the coverage has come from the true crime space of people that, were in the same vein as us, like content creators who are doing research and who are trying to put together the pieces, basically. But of course, this is a lot more information. And I will say something odd. If you have been following the show, you may remember that this was last summer. It had to have been in August that this case, that Asha, came to my mind. And over the years, I would just periodically search and see if I could find any updates on the case. And I found on TikTok this guy who goes by Lawyer Frank NC. And he is a practicing attorney in North Carolina, but he started doing some coverage, and he was even having lives weekly to cover this case. And I just happened to have found him, and he had just kind of started digging into the case. And then we had all of these sort of significant breaks in the case with the search warrants being executed and a lot of information coming out, because to my knowledge, the Roy Dedmon was not ever mentioned in kind of the ether of this story. But to get back to answer your question, I do not think that a documentary has been done of this case, but it should be. And maybe it will once there's a little bit more information.
Okay. So the Dedmon guy, Roy Dedmon, that's the girl's father or not? Okay.
Yeah, the father, the business owner, the patriarch of the family. And another fun fact, I may have mentioned this last time, but he had
lots of fun facts.
There's a lot.
It's a fun story.
There's a lot of the story. But basically, he was around whenever the integration of schools was happening. So segregation was ending. And he was not happy about that. So he went on to start his own Christian school. And of course, people know that that's what it was based in. So that's kind of an odd bullet point. It may not be that odd for that time. I mean, if this is in the 60s and you're starting your own school because you oppose integration and the end of segregated schools, maybe, but certainly this day and time, and I don't even know if the school's still operating, but it doesn't give off a good vibe and a good look for sure. So that's not necessarily an indictment in his character on his character, but I'm just saying that's one thing. And then there was something many years ago. Apparently, they had a horse that was malnourished, and I believe that he did get in trouble for that, for animal neglect at the very least, if not animal abuse. So there's a few sketchy things about this guy. The other thing is that they had this character in their life. So Roy Dedmon and Connie Dedmon owned a care home out in that area. And they had this guy who was, I believe his name is Russell Underhill. And Roy Dedmon was his power of attorney. And actually, Russell Underhill's DNA was found in some of the items that were later found and determined to be ashes. So in September, when their attorney did a press conference, he intimated that it had something to do with this guy because of that DNA. And this guy has since passed. However, nothing that I saw today in the search warrants, granted, it was specific to their phones, but nothing mentioned Russell Underhill at all. But the weird thing is that there's all these little pieces of evidence over the years, like, like her backpack was found and a New Kids on the Block t-shirt. And then after the search warrants in September, then it was identified that there was DNA, like a strand of hair or something like that, that what matched Russell Underhill and also Anna Lisa Dedmon, which is the youngest daughter. So there was something tying that to this family, and of course Russell's connection was through the Dedmon family. And then the other thing was that after she went missing, right away the searches started. I feel like they found maybe a couple of pieces of evidence right away, like a hair tie, things like that on that path that they were able to identify that was hers. But then a year or two later, somebody was at a work site and they found this bag. It was like double bagged in a black trash bag, and that it was her backpack. And so that was what they ended up getting the evidence off of. And so I think that actually at the time they were maybe not able to get it, but because of improvements in DNA technology, then they were able to identify where it came from.
So, all right. So her parents owned a hospital for psychiatric patients.
No, they owned a care home, so sort of like a nursing home situation. But
Okay.
there was an overlap because Broughton, it might be Broughton Memorial, but basically that was the mental patient hospital in Morganton, North Carolina. And they would transport patients back and forth between there and their care home out in, I don't know if it was Shelbyville, Lincoln County area.
So they were transporting patients from the psych hospital to their care center?
Yes. And he allowed, according to what I have read, he allowed his daughters to do that transport.
And the daughters lived in the home, the same building home as the care patient's home, or
No.
there was a separate facility?
Yeah, it was like a business. So
Okay.
they had a family home that they lived at.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a weird story. It's a weird
So
story,
many.
and there is really truly, and I feel like if you start stacking these things about this man, then and some of them you could be like, well, that certainly this isn't good. It's not a good look. But then you start adding all of these other pieces, and I think you get a more full picture of like this could actually be a very nefarious person. And like I said, we don't know if she was taken for like an abuse situation, you know, like assaulting her in a very inappropriate way, or if this was because she was black, or if this was because one of the daughters hit her. Like we don't know at this time, but
Gosh,
I hope that we're closer to getting some answers for this.
definitely. Wait, so the Asha girl, she was black, and her
Yes.
dad wanted to start a school to keep
No.
black. Huh?
Roy Dedmon started the school. He was the guy that the
You said that was
warrants.
her dad.
No.
Okay, now I'm confused.
Okay, so Roy and Connie Dedmon were the parents. They had
Yes.
3 children: Lizzie, Sarah, and Annalisa. The
Oh,
little
okay.
girl is Asha Degree. She's a little black girl. And
So Roy Dedman was the guy with the green car.
it was his car that he gave to his oldest daughter.
Okay. All right. And people say they saw Asha taken
being
in that car.
being pulled into the car, but we
Okay.
don't know who the driver was. So that leaves the question of, was it just Roy driving his daughter's car? Was it all of them? Was it the girls who were out drinking and driving or had an accident and hit this little girl, and then they were on a a cover up mission, obstruction of justice? We don't know. And they
I
still haven't
see.
found her. That's the other thing. Now, in September, the search warrants that came out, they said that they presumed that Asha was the victim of a homicide. So they are
Hmm.
presuming her to be dead, but they have not found her yet.
Now, those warrants that were on the cell phones, those are from the original investigation 25 years ago, and they just released them in October, or were they issued in October?
No. So the at the time, I don't know that they had any connection to the Deadmans 25 years ago. I don't think that they
Oh.
issued any warrants to them. I don't think that they knew. So I think that something somewhere along the line leading up to the execution of the warrants in September of 2024, that's when they got put on to the Deadmans. Now, I have no idea when they first started hearing about them as potentially being involved. Then this past week is when we got the information about the cell phones. So these warrants, I believe it was served on February the 13th. And then this information about the text was very recently released, like in the last day or so.
So, but okay. So, what information were they hoping to gain from cell phones now instead of cell phones 25 years ago?
Well, if you remember 25 years ago, most people did not have a cell phone. Or if they
Yeah,
did, it
but
was
they were
one
they
of the
were
old
pretty
dumb phones.
common. You had, flip phones and stuff like that back then.
Right. But I don't think you would have the records.
No,
They
which is
they weren't smartphones.
why I'm confused about the warrant being executed,
Now
recently.
on current phones. Well, I'll tell you what I think it is because they started putting the pressure on them. They started turning up the heat on them. So they had spoken to the family
Uh,
members in September, right before, like maybe the week before or even days before these search warrants were executed.
so
So
they
I
were
think
hoping to get them, flush them out a little bit so
that's
they
what I
start
think.
talking to each other about what are we
That's
going
what
to
I
do? We
think.
can't. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and I think it's possible that they did not have enough evidence to maybe subpoena or to get the search warrants at that time in September. I'm not exactly sure that they just didn't have the ability, but I'm sure there's some standard that has to be met. So it's possible they did not meet that standard at that time. But then, based on what they found in September, they could then issue the follow up search warrants to get these phones. Or, like you said, or maybe a combination of all, they were setting a little trap and they knew that they had the ability to get them, but they wanted to see what they would do during and after.
Yeah, they must definitely have some information on that family that's significant. Otherwise, 25 years later, they're gonna tap their phones now. I don't see how you could get a warrant for that without something very significant,
Right. Well, that
you
makes
know,
me think.
up
So,
their
so if
sleeve.
we're going off what you're saying, then it would mean that the bar for being able to get and subpoena someone's cell phone was not met prior to the September search warrants, but
Hmm.
it was met with what they found in September or what they learned since then. Because remember,
Mm,
September was also the time frame that the guy that knew the daughters in the early 2000s, that's when he came forward as well.
so that's the guy that did the lie detector, not Roy
Correct.
Deadman.
Right. So they had also originally in September, when they were trying to speak with the oldest daughter, Lizzie Dedmon, they had tried to get her to do a polygraph. And she ended up refusing because she was getting, of course, information from the family like, don't talk to them without representation.
Hmm.
So she didn't end up
Smart.
doing a polygraph test. And then I think that they went back to her this month. And that was when she made the statement to them, if my dad did it, he did it, but I didn't have anything to do with it. And she did take a polygraph test this time in February,
Hmm.
this month, and she was found to be deceptive.
Okay. I'm kind of surprised we know the results of that test, though. It
I am
sounds like
too.
something they would hang on to until the trial.
Well,
Or I
I
mean, they
feel
couldn't
like
it's not admissible, but I mean, I'm saying it's still part of the evidence of their case,
it
ongoing
is.
case.
And the other thing that is a possibility is that they put this out there for a purpose. Maybe it was to continue to turn up the heat on this family, and maybe they have more cell phones that they're going to try to subpoena cell phone records in the coming
Hmm.
days. I
Hmm.
think that they do have a strategy based on just our flushing it out here in this conversation. I think that there's definitely a strategy that's been employed, and I think that that would make sense that maybe they're trying to continue to turn the heat up on this family, especially if they're trying to get if they're close to cracking somebody,
Right.
which is
And
possible.
maybe it's not them. Maybe they just know they just have information about who actually did it, and they're trying to, like you said, pressure them for that. But it's just I'm saying after 25 years, a cold case, you don't just start issuing warrants on people's cell phones without a really good reason. There's got to be some witness came forward and said, I know it was them, and here's the bloody glove that I found after they drove off. Like there's something like that came out, and they
Well,
just need
that's
they're just trying to connect the dots or something.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. So they didn't have the warrants for the cell phones in September. So something somewhere in the 24 years leading up to this past summer in September of 2024, that's when they issued the original search warrants on their homes and their properties. But the
Oh,
cell phones were not in that particular
okay.
search warrant that they didn't take. So something, keep
Oh,
in
I see.
mind,
Okay.
yeah, they had talked to the family in September. Immediately after that, that's when the search warrants for the homes and the properties were issued. Then this month, that is when the search warrants for the phones have been executed.
Okay.
Okay. So
I got you now.
so then after so
Maybe.
we're really yeah,
Hope
it's a
so.
lot. And we're really dealing with the basically September 24 to February 25 timeframe right now. So after the family was interviewed and the search warrants were issued, then we had somebody who knew the daughters that came forward and said that the oldest sister broke down one night crying at a party, really drunk, saying, I killed Asha Degree.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. So I think it's certainly possible that it's somebody outside of this family, but I don't think that you would have her comment of that her comment of, if my dad did it, he did it, but I don't have anything to do with it. And then the fearful nature of her text messages released from the search warrant about the pressure being cranked up on them. And she's messaging, you know, her ex-husband, she's messaging her sister, she's saying, I don't think this is ever going to get better. This is only going to get worse. That's what they said. They think I did it. There was an accident. And there was something else that she said in there. Oh, she had noted to her sister, the middle sister, Sarah, that she was going to go to her doctor and get nerve pills because her nerves were really torn up. So there's certainly, I think they know that they're honed in on this family and somebody knows something. And I think she's the weak link. Whether or not that means that she actually did it or she knows what happened or she was a witness to it or what, of course, we don't know that at this time.
So she actually made the comment that it was an accident in her text messages?
She made the comment that the attorney, the family attorney, told her that that was what people thought.
Oh, okay. Sheesh.
Yeah.
What
so it's a lot of information. I apologize if I was all over the map and made that difficult to follow. It truly is a lot.
It's I mean, it's a lot, but I mean, it's I'm not super familiar with the story because, you know, and you're in it, so I just, you know, it's just me. It's not you.
Well, I've heard that before, but that's fine. It's good to ask clarifying questions and get it out of like the highlights, basically. And, you know, I'm not an expert on the case, but I've done a fair amount of reading and studying about what has happened and the timeline. And so I like talking about it. And but the main thing is that hopefully her family is going to have justice and they'll have their day in court or observe the perpetrators having their day in court, and they'll be able to find her and lay her to rest like they wanted to do. And it's really awful. You know, there's pictures out there. Like I said, the billboard that's out there still has her picture up. And she was a 9-year-old little girl and just the cutest little thing. And it's so awful.
Yeah.
That she was taken from her family. And the other tragedy is what her family has had to go through, because it's a weird story. Little girl leaving in the middle of the night. Why? It doesn't make sense. And you know, that was one of the things that lawyer Frank said, was that we may never know why she left. Now, if they knew her and it was a grooming situation, that they could have lured her out. That's possible. But in the meantime, her family has been accused of being the ones that harmed her, even though law enforcement said early on that they did not believe that the family was implicated. And the parents willingly took lie detector tests. Again, not that they're always accurate, but they did that because they wanted their name cleared. And I don't think that law enforcement believed that they had anything to do with it. And there's a lot of people who follow this case who are very passionate about the fact that the family didn't have anything to do with it, but they've had to endure a lot. Now, The other issue on this case is that a lot of people will talk about the disparity in reporting between missing white children and missing black children. And I do think that that is a problem. In this particular case, though, that hasn't been the case. Now, I believe that it was talked about on the Montel Williams show many, many years ago. I mean, when he still had a show. And at least locally, it has been a case that people have cared about this whole time. So, and the other thing that I would say is, if it comes up, the disparity between the reporting on missing white girls or missing white children versus missing black children, what I would say is that I think that's probably correct. The other thing that I would say, though, is that in the case of, because a lot of people will point to JonBenet Ramsey or Natalie Holloway, and I would say in those situations, there's something else going on. If you believe in the pedocracy as Dave McGowan, the author of Program to Kill, kind of refers to this kind of thing. And you believe that the highest levels of power, which would implicate politicians, and wealthy people that own maybe news companies, that there's a reason that those particular stories are in the ether. That's what I think. That's just a bullet point.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. News coverage is always curated to fit whoever they think is going to, pay them more for the stories. And wasn't Nancy Grace, wasn't she famous for only reporting on missing white kids? Wasn't that one of her things?
It's possible.
I never watched her show, but I coincidentally was listening to a podcast earlier today, and they made mention of Nancy Grace and that she only, like on her show, it was all about missing kids, I guess. And
She did a lot about that. She did a lot of coverage on the Kaylee and Casey Anthony case a long time ago. That was one that I really remember her for. I wasn't a religious watcher of her show. It is possible that that was the case. However, recently, once these search warrants in September were executed, Nancy did cover Ashton Agree's case. However, she did. But people thought that there were some things that she didn't get right exactly. I guess the overall story was correct, but some small details like that Ash's favorite blue jeans were found, and to my knowledge, there's no jeans found whatsoever. There was a famous New Kids on the Block shirt that was found in her backpack, and no one understood why she had this New Kids on the Block shirt, because first of all, she was too young for New Kids on the Block. Like, that was more my generation, and she was a little girl at that time. I was in high school. And it's not impossible.
Maybe it's a hand-me-down.
It was just odd. But then it came out, and her mother said that was not her shirt. So it was just an odd fact. That's why the shirt has been famous, is because not because of New Kids on the Block, not because necessarily the generational factor, but simply because why did she have this shirt? And
so
that
wasn't. Were they implying that it wasn't hers? It was.
Yes.
Did she have any siblings, like older siblings?
She had a brother, a slightly older brother.
Okay. Well, my question was being framed as, were they implying that it didn't belong to the family at all, or was it just it wasn't hers, it was her brother's shirt or something?
Correct.
Like that?
No, it belonged to no one in the family.
Oh.
And that was why it became, because there was so little evidence in the case for so many years. There was what we know about the night she went missing, her mother's story, because her dad had been working maybe on like second shift or third shift, and the mother's story about what happened. I put them to bed at X time. Maybe 9:30, power went out. We were watching the NBA All-Star game with the Bulls. Then, because this was February, like I said, February 13th, it was like a Sunday night in the year 2000. Then, so they lost power. They went to bed like 9:30. It was just the mom and the two kids at home. They shared a room. They had a thunderstorm that night. The last time the mother saw her was maybe 12:30 a.m., which would have been Valentine's Day of 2000. And then they went back to bed. That might have been the time that the dad was getting home. And then they went to get up for their day the next day, and she wasn't there. Then we had two other people. This was what was allowed to be in the public. Two other people had seen her walking down the highway. One of them was a Sundrop truck driver, and he actually drove past her, saw that it was a little girl. He was disturbed by that, turned around, went back. She saw him and ran. Then there was another father and son who were truck drivers, and they were leaving out, and they said they saw her. But that was basically the only information that we had, was that she was walking down the road sometime between 12:30 a.m. and whatever 5:30 or 6:30 the next morning when her parents got up. And one of them, like I said, tried to get in touch with her, but she wouldn't talk to him, come to him. She walked away. Then the next thing you know, she's completely disappeared, and the only thing they find is like her hair tie or something like that, just some not very much evidence. Then, like I was saying, in the next year or two, that's when somebody discovered her backpack double wrapped in a black trash bag. That's where the t-shirt was. That's where they got some of the evidence, the DNA samples that they tied to this family. But I think
Aha.
that they even didn't have the ability to test the DNA with the accuracy that they have today, 25 years later, or 23, whatever.
Yeah. Wow. Sheesh. So she either she got hit by a car or something. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
That's
That's one theory that still wouldn't necessarily explain why she left her home. But then the other question is that was she groomed? Was there some kind of relationship, some way, somehow with these girls through a church connection, because there was this famous sleepover that she had gone to like that weekend. And did they set something up with her to get her to come out of the house, lure her out, something like that? Why was she walking down the road? We don't know. And then obviously she disappeared after that. So we don't know if it was an accident or if it's two totally separate things. If she was simply leaving the house for one reason and then she was hit by a member of this family, or if she was actually picked up by a member of this family.
okay. And it was the Underhill guy as the DNA, right?
Yes. It was the
So
youngest daughter and the Underhill, the guy that was a patient at the family care home, at the Dedmon care home. His DNA was what was found in that backpack. But in the search warrants, and he's passed. So if they just thought it was him, they wouldn't bother. So I don't know that he had anything to do with it at all, or maybe he helped one of the
but
family
did you
members cover it up.
did you just say that the youngest daughter's DNA was also found?
Yep.
Okay. Wow.
But she was only 13 at the time. So I think it would just maybe mean that Ash's backpack was at their home, at their property,
Right.
and then
Yeah.
later thrown out. I think that's what that would mean.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah, that family definitely has something to do with it then. I
There's
don't see
connections,
any.
that's for
Yeah,
sure. I
for
don't really
sure.
like saying, I would like to give people the benefit of the doubt because oftentimes people will be crucified in the court of public opinion. I don't necessarily like that, but I absolutely think that, as I said, this has been going on a very long time. The family deserves to have closure for their daughter, and there's certainly connections here for sure.
Oh, well, let's all hope and pray for the families and that this gets wrapped up quickly because, yeah, that's too long. It's too long of a time to let
Agreed.
that story
It's
go.
just an awful tragedy. So anyway, we've spent a lot of time on that.
Yeah.
Thank you for your questions, Keel. What do you have?
All right. I've got, I don't know if it's equally interesting, but have you ever heard of the Zizian cult? And don't
I
tell me you
have
have. You
the
have you?
Troon
Okay.
terrorist. Yes.
Because I hadn't heard of this at all, but the headline caught my eye, and so I'm just going to go through this whole story here. The leader, well, the story is the leader's been arrested. He's taken in custody along with some of his followers. The guy's name is Lesota, right? All right, he's the. Hold on. So, all right. So, taken into custody alongside Lesota were alleged followers Daniel Blank, 26, and Michelle Zajko, 32, a person of interest in the double murder of her parents, both fatally shot in their heads at their home on New Year's Eve in 2022. Their deaths are 2 of 4 linked to the cult, which is based around Lesota, 34, who previously went by Ziz online. I guess you're familiar with Ziz, being so closely tied to the story.
I I know I kind of know about the story and that kind of what it was implicated in. I haven't done a deep dive, but I've heard bits and pieces.
All right, well, we're going to dive deep into it in just a second here.
Okay.
There was an elderly landowner in California and a border patrol agent killed in a shootout with another member of the group in Vermont on January 20th. So lots of death going on in here. Police say members of the Zizian group could number as high as 30, and they appear to be mainly young trans women who are math and computer whizzes, who
So
previously worked at NASA, Google, and on Wall Street. What were you going to say?
It's just very bizarre. Like the
Very
first
weird.
of all, the idea of a trans cult. I'm surprised that we haven't heard of it before now. Second of all, connections with the deep state or whatever you want to call them. And it definitely, reminds me of some of the other stuff that we've heard about other trafficking rings, their associations with predators in power and and child trafficking and CIA and MK Ultra type stuff. I mean, this obviously has connections to that, or at least there are things that could be linked to that. Rather,
Now, is this a trans cult, or is it a math and computer whiz cult that just happens to have a bunch of trans people in it?
you know what? You're probably right. Most people get very wacky for their math and science.
Sure do. They gather around Ziz, who was born male but now identifies as female, obviously, and why not? They grew up in Alaska before moving to the Bay Area. There he gathered acolytes who believe in the same eccentric and arcane blend of Silicon Valley-driven rationalist movement theories and animal rights. Got all that?
I do. The interesting thing when you say rationalist, that's very interesting because that reminds me of Ayn Rand and
Yes.
sort of the rationalist movement, which a lot of people like there's overlap with rationalism in the liberty community as well. So I find that interesting because I find that what we know about militant trans ideology is that it is not congruent with the ideas of freedom and liberty. Now, I'm not an Ayn Rand expert. I'm not a rationalism expert, but it doesn't, I don't know. That seems weird to me.
I'm sure they were not coming at it from the economics perspective that most people do in the liberty movement or the rationalist philosophies. Both investigators and people who know the Zizians told the newspaper, the Post, many of them have been estranged from their families. Go figure. Some are thought to be on the autism spectrum. No surprise. And they are an anti-sex group who take hormones for their gender transitions. Of course. The Zizians are involved in esoteric practices like, and this is a big word here, unihemispheric sleep. All right? A practice not dissimilar to hypnosis where adherents are told to sleep with one eye open in a state of chronic exhaustion. Boy, that's going to keep you sane, won't it?
So I also want to point out two things about the cult, like, it says that it's a cult. So there's no question there. But the fact that we have a controlling, like, we have this ideology, no sex. That's one thing. Controlling the way that people sleep, another thing. And actually sleep deprivation is a form of torture.
Yep,
And
sure is.
so it's also associated, torture is associated with people who have been mind controlled as well, because that's how you can work to create a dissociative state and people become more manipulatable in that way.
Now, I bet if these people actually gave it a shot, they'd probably enjoy sex quite a bit and probably wouldn't be so angry at everybody else.
Well, I think it could also depend on what type of medical procedures, if any, they had.
Oh yeah,
Because
yeah. I
if
don't
you
know.
had a medical procedure that affects the genitalia, then it's very possible that you are not
They,
capable not only of
right.
reproducing ever, but of enjoying any type of sexual encounter with another human or in any way at all.
Yeah. It doesn't mention that any kind of surgical procedure specifically. It just says they were taking hormones. But as I understand it, taking a shitload of hormones like that will kill any desire to do anything like that. You
Absolutely.
know.
And the other thing is, a lot of times people in this type of situation, I don't know, this is only speculation, but they are depressed. They're having, if you're trans, a lot of times they'll have, um, there's a high rate of depression and self
Mm-hmm.
harming in the community. So there's a good chance that they are also on SSRIs, which are also known to diminish sexual ability and
Right.
sex drive.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. So this practice of staying up all night, what was it called? Unihemispheric sleep, is meant to prove that the two hemispheres of the brain are distinct entities, with one side thought to be female and one male, one side thought to be good and the other evil. They are two sides that, quote, often desire to kill each other, according to Lasoda's blog. They talk as if, all right, this is a quote. They talk as if they really believe they have supernatural powers and they believe movies like The Matrix are real and they can manipulate reality, an investigator familiar with the Zizians told the Post. They talk about the Nazis and the Holocaust a lot. They've made it very difficult and confusing to catch them. They all have so many aliases and move around a lot. We think a lot of what's happened can be traced back to Ziz.
Yeah, and I wanted to add to that that I did hear that the leader had faked his death.
Yes, he did.
And I feel like there's at least one more person who, maybe the one that's implicated in the murder of the Border Patrol agent in Vermont, also faked her death.
Could be. I don't. It did mention his faking of his death. It didn't mention the other one though.
Okay, maybe it was just him.
Many of the group use numerous different names and a variety of pronouns and have been linked to California, Vermont, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. It
Did it
makes
say
them
where in
difficult to
North
track.
Carolina?
It
Probably
did not.
Chapel Hill or something, or Asheville.
Could be. Jessica Taylor, 32, of Berkeley, California, first became friendly with at least four Zizians beginning around 2015 when she met them at the Center for Applied Rationality, an organization in the city which hosts workshops on cognitive science and debiasing with a mission to, quote, develop clear thinking for the sake of humanity's future, according to its website. That sounds really great. She and
Well,
Ziz, go ahead.
sorry, I was just going to say that obviously this is providing evidence of their new age type beliefs that they have. And the other thing, though, is that it really does tie in with the occult. When you're saying that they were basically embodying two different people, two different types of spirits, it's like this duality,
Mm-hmm.
and very much part of the kind of occult belief, as above, so below, black and white, the checkerboard, things like that is what came to mind when you were talking about this belief that they embody, that they're two. And I don't know, the trying to kill each other in the same body, that I'm not as familiar with that one.
And this whole thing just sounds so, just every aspect of the story is just mentally damaging to themselves and everybody around them. I just, wow. I mean, it's amazing. All right. So Ziz appeared normal at first, and they had discussions about self. But by 2019, Taylor said Ziz had started to strike her as creepy. Took her that long to figure it out, especially when he gave a, quote, strange description of the suicide of a mutual connection, which seemed to link to the group's theory on brain function. Ziz's belief was this person had two brain hemispheres, one good, another one non-good, like selfish, and that led to a commitment to kill the self. And I already knew 2 of about 6 or 7 people in this group had committed suicide by this stage, which is a lot for a small group. It was strange they had a high death rate.
Not
2
strange to
people
us necessarily when you know the statistics in the trans community.
outside looking in, that kind of makes sense. 2 people in the group's orbit who took their own lives were named Maya Pasek, who left a quasi-suicide note in 2018 referencing rational thought processes, and Jay Winterford, also known as Jacob Pekarek, a math and science grad in 2021. Since then, the death toll has risen dramatically, including 4 civilians. 9 years ago, due to the high cost of living in the San Francisco area, Lasota and other Zizians lived aboard, listen to this, an old half-sunken tugboat in Pillar Point Harbor near Half Moon Bay.
Okay. Okay. Before we get to the tugboat, did you say how many civilians were implicated in deaths that were
4
familiar?
civilians since
4.
Since the suicides within the group.
And there were how many suicides within the group?
Oh gosh.
If you don't have it, that's fine.
2,
I thought you said
at least 2 at this point.
Okay.
In the story.
And there were 4 civilians. Now, do you know if the 4 civilians were included the 2 parents of one of the members?
That could have been the 4, 2 out of the 4. So they're living in this tugboat. There, I guess in the tugboat, they befriended Curtis Lind, a boat enthusiast described by one friend as a, quote, old friendly hippie.
Sounds like a nice guy.
Yes. Around 2020, he invited the group to live in campers and box trucks on his modest property in nearby Vallejo, which he had envisioned as a sort of an artist's colony, a close friend of Lind told the Post. Lind did not charge the group rent during the worst of the pandemic, but when it was over, he requested some payment. But the Zizians refused to pony up. Kurt was just a great guy, his friend and neighbor of 25 years, John Jenkins, told the Post. He was cool with the Zizians. They obviously were a little different, but he was very open-minded. How nice of him. By different, Jenkins said he meant the group appeared to be mostly men when they arrived to camp on Lynn's land, but then he noticed mail was coming for them with both male and female names. And here's a quote from him. Then we'd see one walk down the street with his shirt off, and we'd see boobies, Jenkins said. It was a little confusing, but Kurt just told us they were transgender. Jenkins was on the property when Lind was allegedly violently ambushed by a group of Zizians in November 2022. Jenkins said Lind was carrying his pistol at the time because group members had been throwing rocks at his house. They allegedly stabbed him 57 times, taking out his eye and thrusting a sword through his back. Lind fired back at his attackers, killing Amir Emma Borhanian and injuring another Zizian. He then limped over to his close friend Pat McMillan's trailer. Keeping up with all these names?
I'm not keeping up with the names, but I'm trying to follow the storyline, and that's just very, very sad that this man was trying to extend his property to them. They weren't paying him, and then they attacked. And I think that it leads some credence to, in the mass shooting space, there's a lot of conversation about whether or not these people are on SSRIs. And I think that can be part of the conversation, but I don't think it's the whole picture. But here, I think you potentially have the repeating pattern of probably SSRIs, certainly hormone manipulation, paired with what? Do we have some? I mean, it is cult behavior. That is mind control for sure. But was there some other outside influence involved?
I mean, what else do you need? Sleep deprivation. You've got a closed group of people adhering to, wild philosophical beliefs. This is a serious thing. So after this guy, this tough son of a bitch, Kurt Lind, limped his way to his neighbor's house, he was described as His eyeball was hanging off his face, and the sword was still impaled in his back when he got to his neighbor's house.
That's
Lynn
awful.
survived that first attack and went on to live a relatively normal life, although without his eye, Jenkins said.
What?
Yep.
They stabbed him 56 times, took out his eye, and
57
and one of the things he was stabbed with was also a sword, and he survived that?
He did. 2 people from the attack on Lind were scheduled to go on trial this April, with the victim as key witness. However, last month, Lind was murdered, with his throat allegedly slit by a 22-year-old Seattle man, Maximilian Snyder.
Wow. And do they lay out the connection of Maximilian to the cult?
California prosecutors have claimed Snyder killed Lind to prevent him from testifying against the suspects accused of the earlier attack on him, so they do in some way. Snyder had previously obtained a marriage license to wed another Zizian, Teresa Milo Youngblood, 21. So he was going to marry one of the Zizians, murder this guy, so she couldn't be implicated in the murder. And it goes on. Oops. And on and on. Okay, 3 days after Lynn's death, Youngblood was also dramatically killed. She had been in a car with Ophelia Bachholt, 27, another math whiz from Germany, who had been part of a lively and fun Jersey City-based group of fintech wizards before getting involved with the Zizians.
And fintech would be financial technology?
Correct. U.S. Border Patrol agents pulled them over in northern Vermont, and police say Youngblood fired a weapon, killing Agent David Chris Mayland, 44. Bachholtz also pulled out a gun, but was killed in the exchange of fire. Youngblood is now being held in a New Hampshire jail in connection with Mayland's murder. The shootout shed light on another case, which was, until then, going cold. The handgun used to kill Mayland was bought by Zajko, according to police. Zajko, reportedly transitioning from female to male this time. Also, using the name Jamie, was questioned by police about the murders, but then fled. Friends said they had heard the elders Jazkos were increasingly distressed by their estrangement from their daughter, and it's believed they told her she was going to be cut out of their will if she didn't resume contact with them shortly before their murders.
They should have never said anything.
Friends of Zajko's parents say they can't believe she wasn't already in custody. We are still so confused and angry that nothing has been done, and there's no justice for Rich and Rita, the parents' names, said a longtime friend of the couple who were landlords of about 16 apartment units in the area. If that Border Patrol agent hadn't been killed, I bet their case would never have been solved. The source, like many friends of the murder victims, did not want to be publicly identified. It's only when the Border Patrol agent was killed last month that everything became connected. They didn't deserve this. They couldn't have children, which is why they adopted Michelle. Adopted. Rich used to say his wife was over the moon when they got her as a baby. Pennsylvania State Police sources told the Post they believe they had enough evidence to arrest Zajko for the murders, but the Delaware County DA's office told the Post cops still had not provided adequate evidence. With Zajko's arrest this week on unrelated charges, that could change. Ring camera video from 2 neighbors' homes the night of the murders show a car pulling up to the Zajko home at 11:30 p.m. A minute later, screams of "Mom!" and "Oh my God! Oh God, God!" could be heard. The footage showed 2 people going into the house, and then an upstairs light went on. 9 minutes later, 2 people were seen leaving the home and driving away in the car. One of the 2 neighbors, who gave their Ring video to police, admitted to the Post it was impossible to make out from the video who got out of the car that fateful night. With the arrests of Zajko and Lasota, the 7 most prominent members of the Zizians are now either dead or in custody. Lasota's sister, Naomi, had reported him missing in 2022, claiming he had fallen off the back of a boat. The Coast Guard searched but did not find a body, and an obituary was published. So that's when he faked his death.
Faked his death. Mm-hmm.
However, far from dead, Lesotho was then arrested in a police raid on a Pennsylvania hotel in January 2023 by officers investigating the murder of the Jazzcos. In that incident, Lesotho reportedly kept his eyes closed, refused to speak, and had to be carried from the hotel room by 4 officers after refusing to move. Lesotho was charged with disorderly conduct and obstruction, according to court records, but did not show up for the hearings. And why would he? The trio arrested this week were all held without bail after a brief court appearance Tuesday. Currently, they all face minor charges of trespassing, obstructing, and hindering, and possession of a handgun in a vehicle. How is that a law to break?
I guess it depends on the state that they were residing in.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
guess.
if you, for example, obviously you can do that in the South. In North Carolina, concealed carry is legal, but a lot of other states don't allow it. So if we're talking Vermont,
Yeah,
it's
but
possible.
Vermont has open constitutional carry. Like they have
Where
absolutely no licensing in that regard.
so where were they caught?
I don't remember this.
And it also could have been, so it could have been the state, but it also could have been the fact that they have criminal history.
I mean, if it's you know, there's a they're already felons or something like that,
Right.
and they have possession of a weapon. That
Right.
could be it, I guess.
Yeah.
I shouldn't be here. I haven't done anything wrong, Lesotho said by video link when he beamed into a Maryland court on Tuesday. Maybe it was Maryland they got caught. How long Lesotho can be uncooperative remains to be seen, but prosecutors in various jurisdictions across the U.S. are now preparing cases. I want Ophelia about the Zizians, Taylor told the Post. I knew about the suicides in the group, so I thought that when people go there, it's maybe dangerous for them. The group has a high death rate, and that was even before the murders. And that was the last of it. So,
Quite a tale.
what can we take away from that convoluted story?
Well, I don't know, but the first thing when I first heard about the story in January, I thought there is some angle here. However, I'm not 100% sure what it is. I think it's very interesting that we have once again the trans community being associated with killing multiple people. And I have wondered if that was in the ether before, starting with like Audrey Hale or Aiden Hale or the Nashville school shooter. And there's been some other people that were kind of associated with that. I wondered if the angle of that was to get people that are traditionally very pro-gun to perhaps support red flag laws, and having people that they are ideologically usually ideologically opposed to committing these types of crimes, that maybe there was a play there from the people that are trying to manipulate reality. Or if like I said before, obviously they said they were a cult, or it's identified as a cult. They definitely have cult behaviors as far as controlling people, sexual activity, sleep, controlling behavior, that kind of thing, disconnecting from your family. Like all of those are very classic cult signs. But then that makes me wonder, especially because the institutions that they were connected with, if we have something else, if there is some other intelligence aspect to what is happening here. I don't know if we have enough information at this time to say, but I think with the overlap of other cults that are in the news that committed famous murders, let's talk about the family, let's talk about Charles Manson, his associations with the Process Church, his associations with Hollywood. And then that goes back to the Strange Stories of Laurel Canyon, or whatever the title of the book is, by Dave McGowan, the same guy who authored Program to Kill about mind control. I think there's something there. I mean, there's certainly, at the very least, connecting threads.
And I don't know what the background is of all these people other than the fact that they're math and computer whizzes, but we know people who excel in lower level education get tapped to, assume these kind of higher roles in
Right.
public service and government, that sort of thing. So
Right.
maybe this
Academically
is kind of
gifted,
related to some
handpicked.
of these people. Yeah.
Yes.
And
And the institutions that they're associated with. That's
yeah,
sketchy.
yeah. And it kind of maybe not specifically related to directly, but the who was the guy that did the that crypto thing, and he was that
Sam Bankman Fried.
yes, that guy. He was a math computer whiz, and he was real autistic nerdy, and he had that supposed group of other nerdy people that he was living with, and so that was kind of cultish, right? Is
In a way.
that kind of similar to this kind of thing?
In
They
a
were
way.
all
And
nerdy
I definitely
weirdos.
think that their story overlaps, right? With a Mark Zuckerberg, that
Yeah.
fucking lizard, you know?
Oh, he's not a
It's a
lizard anymore. Didn't you see him on Rogan?
Yeah, I did. And I heard a word to describe these people today that was it was on Monica's Zoom call that she does. The bro oh, I can't come up with it. But basically, yeah, they're like the bro guys now.
Uh-huh.
But yes, it's a similar story, you know. Now, I'm not saying that these people all have the similar story, but that story of being like excelling academically, socially awkward, didn't finish college because I started, just one of the biggest companies on the planet Earth that took over planet Earth in my parents' garage. That kind of this
Yeah.
story sort of associates that, even though we don't have that information yet. But that's what it reminds me of.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It's all pretty fishy, but entertaining nonetheless.
Certainly, and maybe that's part of it. I have no idea. I feel like it's probably one of the weirdest stories that I've heard in a long while
It's
because
it's gonna be it's got Netflix documentary movie of the week written all over it for sure, and I'd probably watch it because it's there's nearly Tiger King level wackiness going on in this behind the scenes here.
certainly it's a bizarre story. And it is worth following just to see what they tell you, what they allow you to learn about this situation. Why is it
Hmm.
there? What is the point of all of this being allowed to see, or why do they want you to see it? I don't know.
Although it
I
is
actually
tempting. What? Go ahead.
I was just going to say I thought a bigger deal when I heard about the border patrol agent being shot in January. I thought that it was going to be a bigger story, something that we saw a lot about. No, I didn't, but I still feel like perhaps it's going to have some significance down the road.
I will say I'm a little jealous because I don't have a group of followers who refer to themselves as the Keel Thorians. That'd be pretty cool. But
That would be like you to want to have your own cult, weirdo.
all right, let's wrap this up.
Okie
Um,
dokie.
thank you, Ashley, for joining me this evening.
Thank you, Keel, for hosting us.
Yes, for your insights and your news story that you brought to the table. It was very. Yeah, you could do a show just on that, just repeating what you said, and I I think that's maybe somewhere down in the makings. Or am I speaking out of turn here? Has that already happened? I hope not.
No, the only time that I have talked about that case was on a Not Your Mom's News, and
Okay.
I think it was only probably back in either September or October of 2024 because the news had come out about the new search warrants. So that was the first real news that I had seen in a very long time. So I hadn't done anything, but I feel like well, I would do better if I had notes. Um,
I, I'm impressed that you did all that. I thought you had notes in front of you,
I
honestly.
had my notes pulled up, but I did not end up referring to them.
Mm.
Just because we were going back and forth, but when I don't operate with notes like that, then I don't have the exact, name and age and all that
Yeah.
stuff. But anyway, so
All right. Well, thank you anyway. And thank you, listeners and watchers and everyone in the world, because everybody listens to us. Ashley, how can people get in touch with the Union of the Unknowns?
well, Keel, I'm glad you asked. They can find us at unionoftheunknowns.com. That's our Linktree page that has all the myriad ways to get in touch with us. That includes Twitter, Gmail, and a link to our Union of the Unknowns Discord. And we would love to hear from you, and we would love to have you in the Discord. Feel free to reach out to us. Back to you, Keel.
Thank you. I only have one more thing to say, and that is we are the Union of the Unknowns, and we are out.
Bye bye.